Okay, so I want to talk about routing quickly in neoan3. Very high level topic. So this is a project I have still open from an earlier live stream. So what is happening here is there are basically three types of routing, right? So a lot of people ask like, how do you define the router? And the point is you don't. It depends on how you work with things. So let's, for example, say we have created let's create a demo endpoint, right? So I'm going to say neo3, new component, and I'm going to say, let's call this portfolio. Okay, so the first thing it's going to ask me is like, okay, what kind of component is it? Is it a route component? Is it an API component? Or is it a custom component? So the first thing we're kind of going to look into is the route component, right? So let's do 0, and in that case, it's going to ask me, well, do you want to generate a view? Yes, I want. You want to use a frame? Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to use the default demo frame. So what did this do? Well, this created a route that is called portfolio, right? So in my component, I will basically find a portfolio folder with both a view and a controller. So just so you see how that looks like, right? Let's actually peek at this and say, oh, actually, let's do this one, right? Let's close tabs to the right, just so we see this nicely. And let me make sure that you guys see that. Okay. Right, so this is basically how things look like. Now, needless to say, the portfolio, right, then this is not really interesting because this is the auto-generated view that I have, right? So exactly this, right? But that's not what we want to talk about right now. What we want to talk about right now is, okay, so what kind of differences are there in routing, right? So you can see I can simply visit this, go to /portfolio, and what that's doing for me is kind of finding whether or not there's an init function in this controller, right? So the portfolio controller is something that needs to exist within the component portfolio, right? Then this is automatically executed. There are two ways of how you can define a route component, but the interesting point is basically that it has a function in it, right? So if I change this to whatever, and then basically this will stop working, right? So then the next thing that happens here, right, is on a very high level is I'm loading a particular frame, and then I basically say, okay, to the main, and this is the important part. So there are various ways of how you can look at this. So there is actually something in the standard renderer where I say, okay, hook, let's say I want to overwrite the header with home, which is going to be super weird. Then basically instead of this header here, I'm going to use the view of home to fill the space in the header, right? So that's what's super weird now, but just so you understand what's happening. And of course, I also have a footer, right? And so what basically happens is those three main hooks, they're not really hard to find, right? This is something that the default renderer just assumes that there's a header, a footer, and a main content area. But you can, of course, completely design, how basically the layout works by yourself. And that's something we're going to look into when we look into how frames work. So for now, I'm just going to ignore this and say, well, in most cases, what your route component is doing is to fill up the main content area. Okay, and then output this. So what you often see is that this is written differently, right? That so depending on your style, and how your test framework is set up, you want to write either here in the Unicore singleton, then you would extend Unicore and basically load this frame on demand. Now the reason for that is because you sometimes want to completely decouple that from whatever. So let's just assume I'm going to say, no, let's take sub 1 instead, okay? In that case, or demo, okay? So what would happen now is actually too much used to JavaScript that I have to do it like this. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So this still works, as you can see, right? This has now basically no frame. And so in theory, I could decouple this and say, well, so sub1, this is a neoan3 term for getting the parts of a URL. So if I were to say demo, I would get back to my original, where am I here? Yeah, no idea why that took so long. Oh, my internet is kind of, oh yeah, I just lost internet. Okay, that's fine. I'm recording, so that's going to be somewhat okay, I guess. Super annoying today. My internet issues. Super annoying. Okay, it doesn't matter. There are a couple of things I load. That's why this happened. So I could completely decouple this and get this somehow differently in, right, or in the constructor, right, and just assume that there's something like a frame that I'm loading, and then I can build components completely outside the realm of any kind of frame. Or I want to basically standardize the so-called stream of consciousness, right? So as you can see, this is this, and then it goes through. Like, okay, load the frame, do the hook, then I mean, you know, whatever else. Let's add render parameters, but whatever else you're going to do. It's just like top to bottom. Well, stream of consciousness. I mean, that's an expression that I use to basically, like, it reads procedural, right? It looks like you going top to bottom and kind of like experience what is happening one by one just by reading it in this one file. The other option, of course, would be to say, hey, I'm directly extending this frame, which right now I need to import. So instead of the Unicore controller, I'm going to import demo and extending this frame directly, right? So, or your own frame, of course. So do you see how this is not possible anymore? So I can basically just take this out and it will still work like a charm, right? But now it's actually bound to this demo, right? Which, by the way, normally absolutely fine, right? Absolutely fine. And this allows me to go about things a little bit differently because now the frame can have some kind of global functionality that is directly within the context. And that might be something I really enjoy when I work on a bigger project and everything is kind of like a mono repo anyway. Okay, so far so good. So what are the different ways of influencing how this generates? This is maybe something that we should look into here quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete this again, right? Let's delete the portfolio. And instead, let's try out something else here. And I'm going to create a new directory that I'm going to call template. And in this template, I'm going to create a PHP file, actually a PHP class. In that case, that I'm going to call, well, ironically, I'm going to call it route. You will see why in a second. And here, I'm going to now basically rename this to lowercase. Why am I doing this? Well, because when the whole generation of things, right? So here I can basically say, okay, this is name Haskell case in that case. Extends demo, and actually I'm going to say neoan3 neoan3 frame demo. Okay, and what that will do is this is basically how the I need a namespace. Get this namespace neoan3 component. Okay, so the reason why this is screaming is, of course, like this is not valid markup. So why do I do this in the first place? Well, so if I now basically say, okay, so I named this route.php here in the template, right? And if you look at the CLI tool README, you will see how this works. So now it influences how things are generated. So if I now say, like within the scope of the project, of course, neoan3 new component portfolio. Oops. And do the same thing. I say, yes, a route component. Yes, I want to generate a view. Now you can see it did not ask me for the frame this time. Did you notice that? So why is that? Well, because this is something that's already in there. It understands this. So if you go to portfolio, you can see that it now generated this portfolio class, right? And basically using this route template. So this is basically something that I can also do and basically say, okay, let's see how this works. So this will now basically still work to the extent of oops, portfolio controller not found. Oh, actually kind of important here. I'm not sure why it says that one. neoan3 component portfolio controller not found. Well, I guess I should be stricter with this stuff here. Then we wouldn't have those issues. Okay. Sorry. So as you can see, this of course doesn't do anything. Now, but it works, right? So I could in theory now basically say, I know what, right? This hook, same thing here. Say main portfolio, and then let's say this output. And as you can see, it works like a charm. Now, what's the difference between those component things, right? So there's a route component, there's an API component. So an API component works a little bit different. So the standard behavior of something that is, for example, called portfolio, basically B is, okay, so if everything is loaded, so meaning that you have directly extended the frame, then the only thing that you need to do is to basically say get for the method and then portfolio controller, portfolio. Right? And this would basically then let's just return an array. In that case, my array is going to be key value, so it's associative. It's probably bitching because I have no return type. All right. So if I would now say, hey, let's do the following, and say, instead of going for portfolio, let's use a different entry point. So I say API.v1, right? That's the API I want to use, and then say portfolio. Right, and as you can see, I get a JSON response. So the API v1 returns a REST API of key value. Right. The idea here being, of course, that depending on how I define this, that is how I can do a couple of things at the same time. So number one would be, okay, you add the method in front of it, right? So in that case, I do that so I can open it in the browser. And then, of course, you can define certain other things along with it. So it's a get call. So let's just assume that here there is something that I call ID. Okay. So if I were to simply reload this, then I get an error that says request is empty, right? Because this is defined. Now that means like it needs to be set. Now, if I do something like this, then it works because now the ID is set, right? It's a requirement, right? So if I say this is what I want to return, then you can see this is what's going to get returned. And you can do this, of course, with multiple things. And since it's a get call, what I can also do, if I say, hey, I want to have an array with params. By the way, it's recommended that you always give this a default value. So in that case, I'm going to say it's an empty array. And here, I'm simply going to say params. And as you can see, now it's empty. But if I now basically say, hey, there is 1 equals val and 2 equals sum, right? Then what you see is that the outcome is that those params are read accordingly, right? So I can basically also define those if I want to, right? I could say like, hey, I only want to have 1, right? And then you can see my params are just val. So that's basically how the whole routing principle works, and it's really that simple. So you don't need a router. You basically, depending on how you define your functions, you can directly call them. They're not exposed otherwise, right? So it can't directly navigate to this. There's no other way of executing them other through an API. So that makes it relatively secure. And of course, since what I can also do since version 3.1 is to basically say I can use PHP 8 attributes to kind of do this, right? So what I could do is to basically say I want to have an authorization strict, right? So this would now require, and actually I have to quickly check how demo is set up, because as far as I remember, yeah, okay. Yeah, let's make sure that this is a JWT wrapper instead of a session wrapper. So it would actually work in theory if I'm writing an API. And now basically this authorization requires, so it says restrict, which basically means that, okay, if there is no authorization set, so if the user's not logged in, then block the request, right? And let's see how that pans out. You can see I get an error unauthorized, right? And in the network tab, what you see is if I reload this, that it's actually throwing a 401. See that? So that there's really not that much that you need to worry about if you handle that. But that already gets into the next topic a little bit. Then this is really just a 5-minute, hey, how does routing work? And you know, so if you wanted to create an entity, you would probably have a post and so on. Just a little bit of an overview, and so you can play around with it, right? And kind of, you know, starting to feel at home. Awesome. Then, yeah, let's stick it to those 5 minutes, so you have some time to kind of get used to it before we jump into the next topic.